And what's going on, folks? It's your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag, swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local Zoom room near you. And we are back. Apologies for the long hiatus. Over the past couple of days, I mentioned to you all, really actually over the past month, um, my family and I have been going through a very difficult time with one of our relatives actually making transition. And so just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we finally put our family member, our beloved family member, to rest. Um, it was a somber kind of moment, but it was one that certainly had uh, all the features and hallmarks a of finality and also of closure. So I want to make sure that we readjust and that we refocus um, back onto our regularly programmed schedule. Okay. So as you all begin to join and flood in on the chat, definitely chime in, say what's up, drop a like, give me a subscribe or and a follow. Today, we're going to actually go over some key updates and announcements. Let me actually share my screen with y'all. Hmm. I think this is it. No, that's not it. Give me 1 second here. Just want to make sure I have so many windows open. This has to be it. Excellent. Okay. So today we have a couple of announcements that I want to share with y'all. The week of March 30th. Today is April 1st. It is indeed a Wednesday. So a couple of announcements. Of course, our YouTube live this week and every other week thereafter will be Wednesdays at 3 p.m. You can join me right here. Yours truly at 3. So that way you can stop on by, ask any questions, raise any comments, share any concerns that you may have with either the readings, an assignment, your grade, or just kind of a technique, trying to learn how to actually do some things with writing in the classroom so you can apply it to your paper. This is the place that we have to kind of share and exchange ideas. So please join me weekly, Wednesdays at 3 p.m. All right. Next, your grades have been posted for writing assignment number 1, as well as your dialectical journals. I've provided some feedback. Please make sure to carefully review that feedback. And if you would like to revise your writing assignments, and this only applies to the writing assignments, not the dialectical journals. But if you would like to revise your essays for a higher grade, then please schedule an office hours appointment with me first. Okay. You must schedule an office hours appointment with me first before resubmitting if you want to get a higher grade. Okay. Next, your writing assignment 2 grade should be returned back to you the day after tomorrow. I'm about halfway through that now. So I'm just finishing the second half by Friday. So you can expect to see those on Friday evening. Just take a look or peruse through your Canvas grades. I'm not sure if you receive a notification whenever the grades are updated on Canvas, but if they are, be on the lookout. And if not, definitely go and check. Okay, check at least by Saturday. All right. Um, New post, we have our course module 9, which is going to focus mainly on MLA format as well as citation, quotation, and integration, specifically of quotes, paraphrases, formats, and summaries. Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit today. Office hours appointments are indeed available by clicking this link or by going right over here to the simple syllabus. Let me actually switch the view. By going right on over here to simple syllabus and making sure that you click on the link that says schedule office hours appointment. Okay. Um, you can access it in one of two ways, either here on the announcements or the other underneath the syllabus. Okay, folks, upcoming deadline. So you do have your second dialectical journal coming up. This is April 1st. It's not due this weekend, or rather this Sunday. It's due the following Sunday after that. Okay, so you still have some time to actually enjoy your Easter dinner without having to super stress. Writing assignment number 4 will indeed be connected to dialectical journal number 2. Both dialectical journal number 2 and the writing assignment number 4 are indeed focused on Jennifer government. Okay. This is just like, excuse me, the setup is similar to the setup that we had for nickel and dime writing assignment number 2. Okay. Where you had the dialectical journals, which you are indeed, I'm encouraging all of you to select quotes. In this case, for Jennifer government, I want you all to select quotes that demonstrate one of the themes that you see being explored throughout the book of Jennifer Government. Okay. Why? Because your writing assignment number 4, the literary analysis, is going to call for you to initiate an argument, right? That's carried out and developed through literary analysis, but that focuses on the uh, making a case for how the author is illustrating or communicating the central message of the text most effectively. That is to say, through what character's journey does the author illustrate the main message of the text? What are the symbols? What are the motifs? What are the traits, character traits that are associated with that particular character? And I want you to identify this here is part of the work you'll have to do in dialectical journal number 2. I want you to identify several key scenes throughout the book. The book is divided into 6 parts. You'll need to identify 5 quotes from each one of the parts. And in those parts, you'll need to identify key specific scenes from your character, or either regarding your character, or rather regarding the theme, okay, that's associated with your character. And I want you to identify those quotes. I want you to actually write about them. I want you to analyze them, critically analyze them in your dialectical journal assignment. Okay. That's the entire role, point, and purpose of this particular assignment. It's to help to get you started on your writing assignment number 4 by having you already pull out, identify, and analyze key quotes that demonstrate the how the author is using a particular character to reveal the message, a particular character's journey to reveal the message. Okay. On that note, the readings that are due for this week, first and foremost, come out of Jennifer Government. We should be reading through page 158 all the way through 198. That's about 40 pages. And then next week, I believe that we'll actually wrap up with the rest of the text. Make sure that you all are actually reading, highlighting, underlining key notes, and also 2 quotes from the book itself that help to accomplish the work that you'll need it to accomplish for dialectical journal number 2. Next, we have writing in our book, Writing Arguments, chapter 5, Using Evidence Effectively. Now, you can also find a handout, free handout for this particular module, excuse me, chapter, located underneath course module number 9 here. Okay. As a matter of fact, I think it's like one of the first or second readings that's actually up there. But just double checking it, and you can actually confirm. Okay. That is indeed our updates and announcements. Everything should be here posted pretty clear. If you have any questions or some things that you might want to follow up with me on, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead, hit me up, send me a text, send me an email, reach out to me, and then I will indeed get back to you ASAP. Okay. All right. So now in transitioning over to our main lecture for today. Okay. So y'all should be able to see my screen now. This is something that I've actually put together a lecture, a little bit of a lecture for us that I put together where we can. There we go. Okay, got the spacing right. Um, where we can dive into some activities, some exercises, uh, and also we can get into the key framework for the day. Okay. So I'm gonna actually skip over the warm up. It doesn't look like I have anybody here in the chat for us right now. Some people in the chat, I would have them actually go ahead on and complete this warm up quiz, a little pop quiz that I put together on the elements of narrative structure, and so the actual test is a Quizlet. You don't have to actually complete this test or at a later date or anything. You're not going to be receiving points at a later date or anything like that. It was just something that I wanted to do, for whoever might actually be in here on the. So, but one thing that I do want to highlight for y'all, and part of the purpose of the quiz itself, is the elements of narrative structure. Okay, are perhaps one of the most invaluable tools that you have been exposed to right now that'll help you to identify, highlight, and underline key symbols, traits, um, uh, characters, character moments, quotes, and things of that sort. Why? Because the elements of narrative structure that we used way back in Unit One when we were putting together our our critical memoirs are some of the very same elements of narrative structure that we will also see developed and worked on, or excuse me, present in Jennifer Government. Okay, so those elements there are vitally important because they not only are applicable to just the critical memoirs, no, they're actually important and relevant to the overall project of narrative writing. Okay, that's why those elements of narrative structure are so important, and you can't necessarily leave those things there behind. You can't leave them behind. The concepts, tools, strategies, and techniques that we learn over the course of this semester, you can't leave those behind once you submit your essay, right? And just think, oh, now I'm done with it. No, no, you can't do that because those elements, those techniques, those strategies all come into play as and they really kind of take shape in a cumulative effect, meaning that everything kind of comes together all at once to form something larger than its individual components, right? For those of you all who may have actually been born way back in the day in the 1900s at some point in time, or at least might be familiar with cartoons from the 1900s. There's a cartoon from the 1900s called Voltron, where you had five individual lions who are pretty formidable on their own, right? Pretty significant, pretty straightforward, pretty powerful on their own. But when they come together to form a new mega figure, otherwise known as Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Okay, it's precisely where Power Rangers got their inspiration from. Those of you who may actually be familiar with Power Rangers, all right. Um, let's see. Okay, so oh hey, what's going on, Miss V? How you doing? I see you. What's happening? What's happening? Um, So we have the elements of narrative structure, right? And again, you want to go back, you want to restudy those, and then you want to begin to identify them in the book. But you want to identify them by highlighting, underlining, circling, right? And you can change the color coding based on the different elements of narrative structure. So, for example, right, for characterization, you want to have one color code for characterization. For theme, you want to have another color code for a theme, right? For setting, you want to have its own color code, so on and so forth. For all the different elements, there are five in total, voice, so on and so forth, right? There are five in total, action and dialogue. You want to make sure that you're able to color code what it is that you're identifying in your, excuse me, in the book in Jennifer Government. Okay. Now let's dive in. So really, I want to talk about narrative structure, right? Uh, Plot is another color code that you want to actually put together here, right? The elements of narrative structure are not the only unit that we're going to be revisiting here, but rather you also want to combine the techniques and the tools that you learn, the craft that you learned from rhetorical analysis. You see, literary analysis combines both the techniques that we've discovered from unit critical memoir writing, as well as the techniques from unit number two, rhetorical analysis. They combine, right? Voltron, Transformers, right? Heck yes, for being born in the 1900s, Miss V, all right, right? Or at least having sensibility enough to actually go back and watch those goody, oldie but goodie cartoons, right? You see, so we want to actually take and combine those two units of techniques into something new. That something new is what is known as literary analysis. Okay. So, um, another little quiz that I would have you all do if we were face to face is to list and describe the components of the rhetorical situation, right? Argument is a way of persuading others to change their minds and actions. One of the key techniques of argument is otherwise known as persuasion, which refers to the means by which a speaker or a writer, just an author, right, makes their argument effectively. Okay. To that degree and extent, right, people who engage in the act of rhetorical analysis are also too engaged in doing one particular activity that overarches everything, and that's the activity of critical thinking. Meaning that you, as a rhetorical analysis, as somebody who's engaging in the art of rhetorical analysis, and thus by extension, literary analysis, your goal, right, your curiosity, the thing that you should be uh, at a foundational level curious about the most is growing an awareness, right? Trying to discover how the author is thinking, right? Trying to discover, right? The thing, the passion, the thing that you want to cultivate for this particular unit, right? And as you're learning the art of literary analysis, the intrinsic tool inside of yourself, right? Intrinsic meaning inside of yourself, tool that you want to develop is a curiosity for discovering how the author is thinking. That is what we call that motivation, right? That intrinsic value, right? It's not just something that you could just kind of wish on a star, right? It's something that you have to actually develop. That's called critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills, right? Critical thinking refers to an awareness of how one thinks, right? It depends on the subject, right? The subject could be you. The subject could be, in this case, it's an author, Max Berry, right? The subject could be the director of a film, Ryan Coogler from Sinners. The subject could be an author of a song, right? Or the writer of a song, right? J. Cole, The Fall Off, right? So the idea of critical thinking as an art form, right, specifically refers to an awareness of how one thinks. Okay. Right. An awareness of how one thinks. And also It can be cultivated, developed by identifying, or excuse me, by searching for, putting yourself in the mind, in the position of discovering how the author is thinking. Right, that's how it can be developed. All right, just from a broad based overview. Okay, that's how it can be developed. Right, by putting yourself in a mind state, right, in the framework where you want to be curious about how the writer is thinking. Because once you have that curiosity, then what you can do is you can apply. You can now do something to enact, right, the strategy of critical thinking. And in order to enact the strategy of critical thinking, you have to learn five key practices, right? These are what we call the components of critical thinking: analysis, summary, interpretation, synthesis, and critical assessment. Okay. Analysis refers to uh, the practice of considering the whole and breaking it down into its component parts, right? That can be examined individually, right? So, for example, if you have a quote is a part of a larger whole, right? In and of itself, the quote itself is the whole. Okay. If you select a quote to analyze for the dialectical journal, what you want to do with that quote is identify some of the key parts of that quote, and you want to write them out, right? You can write them down in your notes. And then once you write them out in your notes, now you have to go back and take a look at those notes and do something with them. What do you have to do with them? You have to take those notes that you've identified, the components of this particular quote, and now you have to actually explain how each part functions, not all in one sentence, but in as many sentences as you have parts. Each part should at least have its own sentence. Okay. Right. So when you can explore and examine and then re explain that to your readers, now you have something to say. You understand? That is how you engage with literary analysis. The next activity, right? The next practice, summary. Summary refers to the act of pulling out the main message and its central points, right? Of a particular fact. It could be a quote, it could be a bit of information, a statistic, right? Pulling out the main points and restating them in a condensed way. Okay. So the primary purpose of summary is to actually reduce the amount of words or reduce the amount of in some cases, right, time that it takes to explain a larger component, right, or a larger element, right? When it comes to summary, summary is the opposite. You want to actually identify the key parts and then restate them in a condensed way. So when it comes to your dialectical journals, you just want to take this out as an important tidbit, key information, component of information. Um, when it comes to um, your dialectical journals, you do not want to summarize the quote. Okay. Matter of fact, you don't even want to use this critical thinking skill by itself at all. You want to use it in combination with another critical thinking skill. So you can use summary in combination with analysis, right? Where you summarize the overall meaning of the quote first before you move into describing its component, to identifying and describing its component parts, right? So that's fine. You can do that, right? You can combine summary with interpretation. You could combine summary with sentences or synthesis. You could combine summary with critical assessment, but do not do summary by itself as an entry or as a response, right, in your dialectical journal assignments. That is not what we are looking for there, right? And that's only because summary is such a unique skill. It's such a unique element of critical thinking, right? Summary is the only one out of all the critical thinking um, uh, activities, it's the only one that compels its users to condense the information as opposed to elaborate or expand, right? Next, interpretation. Interpretation refers to the act of making inferences based on evidence and reasoning about the unstated assumptions in a particular text. Right now, this here is kind of like a brother or a sister to analysis, right? That's what I mean when I say that it's a mode of analysis, right? It's a bit of a brother or a sister, okay? Meaning that when your goal in making an interpretation is to kind of, excuse me, sorry, not kind of, but it's to um, deliver or, excuse me, it's to represent the meaning of the component parts that have been identified from the analysis. Okay. So, in this sense, right, it's kind of like a brother or sister to analysis. Okay, but what points, what discoveries can you make? This is what interpretation asks you to explain and to elaborate on. What discoveries have you made based on these components that you've identified? What do these things here mean? Okay, that's what interpretation is asking and calling for you to do, right? Next, synthesize, right? Synthesis or synthesizing speaks to after you break down the component parts of a particular quote, idea, or a fact or statistic, whatever it might be, where you're applying the skill of analysis, right? Synthesis requires that you now not only kind of infer, right? So you have your inferences after your analysis, or excuse me, your interpretation after your analysis, right? Synthesis calls for you to now, with your analysis and the interpretation, now that you have these new meanings, right? It's calling for you to reconnect what it is that you've analyzed, what it is that you've interpreted back to the larger part of your argument, right? Back to, in other words, your thesis statement. So, uh, when it comes to synthesis, synthesis refers to the act of rebuilding and pulling everything together, right? Sorry, excuse me, sorry, not the rebuilding part, right? But rather the pulling together. It is literally the practice of pulling things back together, right? So that way you can reconnect it based on now this new interpretation that you've already analyzed and interpreted, right? Where you can pull all those things there back and tie it into or tie it back to your thesis statement. Okay. Critical assessment, right? Or what it means to assess critically means to judge the quality of the material on its own as compared with other related materials. So here, right, you're able to actually connect. It's calling for you to connect, right? What it is that you've synthesized, or what it is that you've interpreted, or what it is that you have analyzed or even summarized, right? It's asking for you to connect whatever that thing is, right, that you've analyzed and interpreted, right, and summarized. It's asking for you to connect it with something else, right? Or to evaluate how well the thing that you've analyzed or summarized, right, the subject, how well it functions within the category of the kind of type or thing it is. How it's asking you to evaluate or judge the quality of what is being presented as a particular kind of type of thing. So, like, let me give you an example, right? So, for example, the if I am called to assess critically the new album of Jack Harlow, right? So Jack Harlow just recently released a an album, and he calls it, or I believe if he doesn't call it this, then people have been identifying it as such, an R&B album, right? Well, R&B has a particular kind quality to it, right? They have rules, they have structure, and they also have a history, right? So the rules, structure, and history are going to be the criteria by which one can define whether or not something is R&B as opposed to rock and roll, as opposed to jazz, as opposed to punk, so on and so forth, right? Reggae, right? We can keep going. Those criteria are what you want, those categories are there, right? Are what you want to, excuse me, the those are the elements that actually fit within to a category. Those are the things, the elements that you want to actually use to evaluate the kind or type of thing that is the focus of your subject. Okay. So that's what it means to assess critically. Okay. It means to judge the quality of the material based on the criteria or the elements that make up the category that the subject is in, right? So, like for example, if Max Berry is using a simile, right, and part of what you're showing is how he's how how uh, through his use of simile he's able to reveal the character, the theme, right? Okay, well, you want to actually evaluate how well his or assess critically how well the example of his use of uh, 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 the example that you're trying to actually analyze here. You want to evaluate how well, right, that particular kind of metaphor there is actually functioning based on what a metaphor is, right? So based on the quality and characteristics of a metaphor, right? Or a simile, right? If you're analyzing how his use of a particular kind of simile helps to reveal the overall message, right? Or his use of a metaphor helps to reveal his overall message, right? Th- that's how you want to actually evaluate it, okay, or assess it critically. Now, let me kind of walk you through what this looks like in writing. Okay. So the in the body section of your writing assignment number fours of your literary analyses, right? You're going to have to construct a whole section of your paper that's only focused on analyzing um, Max Berry's use of elements of narrative structure to illustrate his overall message. Okay, so you might be analyzing a particular uh, pattern, right? Um, where he's using metaphors, right? Or where he's using a set of characters, right, to illustrate this larger message. Whatever the case is, in that section there, you're going to have to actually structure your ideas and your analysis in a very careful way that I want to show you right here, right? So first and foremost, right, the let's say for the first section of the body of your essay, you want to first and foremost establish a topic sentence. Let me give you an example. I'm going to use a character from a book in another class that I'm actually working with, right? Issa Rae from The Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl. Issa Rae, sophisticated, this is my topic sentence. So this is exactly what my paragraph is going to analyze, okay, in the body section of my essay. So the first critical component that I'm going to analyze and explore uh, that works to demonstrate the larger message is what I'm going to communicate right here in this topic sentence, right? So here we go. Issa Rae's sophisticated use of personal anecdotes creates the foundation for her logical appeals. Okay, so here, what do we see? I'm talking about Issa Rae, and I'm talking about her use anecdotes in relationship to her use of logos, right, or logical appeals. Okay, so that's my first sentence right there. Boom. That's how I'm starting this thing off. I'm coming out the gate swinging. My first example that I want to actually provide readers with is gonna be it has to be set up though, right? It has to be set up. Okay. So, how do we set up a quote? Or how do we set up one of the quotes that we're going to be using from our dialectical journals into our actual essay? Well, I'm glad you asked that. Let me show you. So, your setup should do a specific kind of job. It should tell the readers who the quote comes from, right? In some cases, it may need to be who and where, but at the very least, it needs to tell the readers who the quote comes from. So your first sentence is going to say, in this case, is there's another author that I use from a totally different class, right? Issa Rae acknowledges that, right? Or Issa Rae explains, or Issa Rae agrees, or Issa Rae shows, or Issa Rae demonstrates, right? These are the kind of uh, templates that you want to use in order to get started with your quote. Now, mind you, you're going to start here, right? So in this case, Issa Rae, right, acknowledges that separated by a comma, space, and then here, right, we have, whoops, looks like I have too much space there. Oh, no, I don't. That's just this thing. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so Issa Rae acknowledges that you want to separate it by a comma and then open quote mark, right? Open quotation mark right along with the quote itself. So whatever the quote is, boom, you want to put quotes around it, right? And then insert the quote right there. You're not finished yet. Right after that, you need to open parentheses, put the author's last name, and then a page number. You don't have to use a comma here. Okay. So it could just be the author's last name and then page number. When you do that, that lets your readers know who said it and what page it can be found. Okay. You could swap this word here out for any one of the other followings or another verb of your choosing, right? But the main thing is that when you start, or excuse me, the way to introduce or set up your quote is right here. After you introduce your quote, right, and provide your quote, then you want to move on to thinking critically through the quote itself. So, one, you want to first and foremost begin to make an interpretation of the quote, right? So, provide us with the inferences based on the evidence in the text itself about the unstated assumptions in that text. Okay, so here, what does this quote mean? What's the deeper meaning here? Right? Give it to us. Give us your interpretation. Right? And then you can take that interpretation and develop it even further by analyzing the quote itself. That is to say, in the next sentence, after you provide us with your interpretation, then you want to actually provide us with your breakdown and the component, the most important parts, most important components of that quote that you just introduced. So, what is it that we need to pay attention to? Tell us in that third sentence, right? And after you just identify the important parts, right, then you can move on to another sentence and then begin to break down, right, what each part means and why it's so significant or why it's so significant. Because ultimately, when you break it down like that, that's it. All you want to do is just break it down, right? Put it into its component parts. Uh, provide us with an explanation of its meaning, and then you're done with the analysis part. Next, you want to transition to the synthesis part. See how all of this is coming together? Based on what it is that you've analyzed and now have broken down, right, in the previous sentence, now what you can do is reconnect those components, right, your new interpretations, right, what it is that you've now just explained. You can reconnect that to your thesis statement, right, and show, right, in this way, the author is doing da 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 da, right, resetting your thesis. That's how you think critically through a quote, right? That's how you think critically through a quote. So here's the just to kind of recap it for you, right? So when you want to introduce or integrate quotes or any kind of statistic or information, anything like that, when you want to introduce someone else's ideas, it starts off like this. You need a setup, tell the readers who the quote comes from by using signal words, interpret the quote after you insert the quote, right? Interpret it, and then you can analyze it, eventually moving on to assessing it critically. Okay. All right, folks. Okay, well, hey, I want to actually take a pause for the cause and see if there are any questions that may pop up from the chat. Any questions? Okay. Doesn't look like there's any questions. I'm sorry for my face, y'all. I squeezed some lemon in water, and I've been drinking it all day. And some of the pulp from the lemon got down into my water, and I've been into it. A little sour. I wasn't ready. Okay, folks. Well, if there are no questions, I will indeed wrap up today's YouTube live for English C1000. This here has been a plum pleasing pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. This here is your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag, swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local Zoom room near you. I want to thank y'all so much for turning on out. Y'all take care of yourselves and each other. If you have any questions, please schedule an office hours appointment with me by looking at the syllabus or even on the announcement. Shoot me a text, send me a message on the inbox, and I'll get right back to you. All right, folks, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.